Hi, welcome back. This time I'm going to show you how to paint a nice metallic color of your choice for armor. Generally, metallic colors that come pre-bottled can range from being very good, such as Turbo Dork's line of colored metallics, but they can be very cumbersome to work with, especially to newcomers in the hobby whose time working with metallics can be better spent just painting a miniature in flat tones. Now, allow me to show you a simple way to begin this process and a simple way to get your tools and everything ready and to get a colored metallic armor over the miniature of your choice. Now, here we have everything we're going to need. I would recommend a piece of cardboard over a traditional palette, since cardboard generally will help absorb some of the mineral oil from oil paints better. Now, one effective method you could do on this, which I'll show in a later video, is using contrast paints over metallics for a very simple method. But this is if you want a more dull, less metallic sheen. So, what I have here is a Winsor & Newton Artist's White Spirit. Now, white spirits are what you want to use to rinse your brushes when working with oil paints. Since they're oil-based, water won't go with them. I'm going to use 2 cups. One clean, one dirty, one for rinsing a brush, one for thinning the oils if we need to. We can never have too many, in all honesty. Whatever unused portion we have will go back into the bottle. I always like to just dab a smidge off onto the card to help thin the oil paints going forward. I always keep a second one in reserve just in case. We're going to set that off to the side. Always close up your mineral spirits or your white spirits, because you don't want this stinking up your hobby room. If you spill this, this is a pain to get out. I've done it before. It's not a good time. Now, what I'm going to be using is Grumbacher Academy Colors. I can't even pronounce that. Purple. It's an oil-based color. Now, very highly saturated. What we're going to do is we're going to just take and dab a small amount onto our piece of card. That might look a lot. Trust me, it isn't. We're going to let that incorporate with the white spirit to help thin it out just a smidge. We're going to leave our Q-tips here for the process of oil tinning. We're going to leave this off to the side since I'm right-handed. This makes my job easier. You want something like a palette knife too. That way, if you want to clean off your palette later, or if you want to just smear this into some of the angles of the miniature on flat surfaces, you can do that too. Now, let's get started. Now, what we're working with here is a Reaper miniature known as a hellknight, Order of the Nail. What I thought would be a very nice looking armor set would be a deep purple armor with a glowing red power effect on the sword, kind of a fiery look. So, right now off screen I'm loading up my brush with our purple oil paint. Just lightly pulling it out and fanning it off onto the cardboard. Here's what you want, is something like this. Don't worry about the straggling hairs in your brush that happen when you work with oils. Oils like to attract anything in the room. Now, the process is simple. We just start rubbing our brush full of purple goo all over the model. You can be sloppy with this. It doesn't have to be pretty. In all honesty, you could probably not even thin this and it would still work effectively. Just sloppily apply it. Try to avoid the horns, but it doesn't really matter. We're going to varnish this once it's dry to paint over everything. What we're essentially trying to do, and why we're not bothering being careful, is we're trying to get it to soak into all the recesses of the armor. I would recommend using a synthetic brush for this, just for the benefactor of synthetic brushes are more tailor-made for oils. Since a natural brush will just get destroyed in the process of applying this. And yes, this is going to look rough. That's because, well, it is rough at the moment. But that can be fixed very easily. Nothing in painting is hard to fix. It's only paint. Painting is a simple and easy thing that is often overcomplicated by the tasks of many people. They believe painting is a chore. It's much like making a pasta dish. It's easy. It's simple. It just requires a little bit of time, a little bit of skill, and learning a few techniques to make the job easier. Think of it like working a very labor-intensive job. As time goes on, you do find ways to effectively do your job efficiently while still keeping yourself amused. Same rule applies here. I often compare this with cooking or certain fields of work where it may seem hard from an outsider looking in, but for someone who's been doing the hobby for eons, I can safely say it's not that hard. If you're wondering, this is not a bare metal miniature we are painting over. I did prime the miniature in black and then apply a base coat of lead belcher over that black color, but that's because, well, just clean our brush out. Going back and forth between our clean and dirty thinners to really get the color out of our bristles. Wipe it off on a piece of card. And now we're going to take just a standard Q-tip. It can be a cheapest Q-tips imaginable. And we're going to let this purple soak in just a little bit. The reason why you want this to soak in, honestly, is quite simple. It'll tint the underlying metallic color to this sort of purplish tone and will give the final product a very nice purple tinted effect. Now, you will notice it'll be a little bit rough, but we'll go in and take care of that. So just start rubbing off areas of this. You could use a piece of tissue paper too if you choose to. Really, it doesn't matter what you use to wipe it off with. As long as it effectively works. You're going to go through a lot of Q-tips, and honestly, this is a rather messy process. If at any point you would like to put on gloves, this is definitely probably the best time in this project to wear gloves, because you will be covered in oil paint once it's done. Not like it's necessarily hard to clean off. Oil paint is a relatively simple thing to get off, but no one wants to be wearing oil paint the rest of the day, especially if you have plans. What I'm doing is in a slight rolling motion to just help all the oil paint that's on the surface come off the surface. And you can tell when I've switched to a clean Q-tip, obviously. You can definitely tell because I am not using the same Q-tip to do this entire model. We'd be fighting a losing battle. It's a miniature that I think has a lot of character to it. A lot of charm. It's quite fun. Quite a fun mini. It's entertaining. It's just got some character to it. And that's really the whole point of tabletop gaming, is just having character with your minis. Just having fun. That's one thing this hobby does well, is just bringing people together to have fun. And that's something I wish that more hobbies were a thing for. Just bringing a group of people together just to have fun with each other. That's why when you paint these little tiny minis, a lot of your stress and your worries just go away. Something awfully pleasing and wonderful about doing these little projects. Now, you may find it tedious at first, but once you've got your first couple of successful minis out there, it makes you feel good. Just going to rub a little bit of extra off on the knees just to add some character, and this should be your final look. A nice, highly saturated metallic purple that gives a very nice but very highly saturated look. And of course, what this is good for is a variety of techniques you need to use metallics for. Each here is that even for newcomers, working with oil paints is not as difficult as it's made out to be. Yes, oils can be unforgiving for some things, but for the most part, oil paints are rather forgiving. They're easy to work with, they're easy to apply, easy to remove. If you follow the right steps and the right protocols, oil paints can be very simple to tint up or to create a wash over a model with. Now, when I come back in this video, I'll have cleaned up some more of this mini, and I'll have made sure that everything is nice and ready to go, and we'll get to work on that sword. And after cleaning up some more of the mini and getting my wet palette ready off screen and getting the reds we'll need for this project and some extra brushes ready, allow me to explain how to create a nice and effective power sword effect you could use for Warhammer or really any tabletop RPG. Now, it's a relatively simple process. What it requires, make sure you have your wet palette ready. Start with your darkest tone. In this case, our darkest tone is going to be Corn Red by Citadel. You can use any paint you like. You can use any paint brand you like. I'm using Citadel's Corn Red because it's a nice red. It's a nice middle-of-the-road dark red color that really does look nice. You don't need a ton. You don't need to flood your palette with reds. Get just a smidgen more. There we go. That should be plenty. That should be absolutely plenty. Okay, and upon that note, I've got something to rinse my brush in. So just rinse your brush off. So this way you can go to your next color and not contaminate it with a dark red color. Just really clean your bristles out effectively. The nice thing about these Citadel color cups is that they do have the little ridges on the bottom that help with this kind of process. Now, that's finished. We're going to use Mephiston Red as our secondary color. Same process, just get a nice sized daub, rub it onto your wet palette, rinse your brush. And our two final colors, which will be our two highlights, our two bright tones that will give sort of a fiery effect, are Fire Dragon Bright and Evil Sun's Scarlet. Again, you can use any color you choose. This is just what I'm using because it's what I have on hand, and because the paints are guaranteed to cover nicely. That's one of the benefits of using Citadel. While they're a little bit pricey, they are going to actually do the job as advertised. Meaning that for a beginner or a long-time hobbyist, this will be an effective means of creating a nice paint job. And just really layer up the Fire Dragon Bright. This is a color that's quite thin, but will come off very bright when finished. Now, that's done. We're going to use a little bit of a glaze medium, which, if you're unfamiliar with what a glaze medium is, a glaze medium is used to help create a smoother transition between tones, and we're going to add just a drop to each. It's alright if you add a little more than usual. That's okay. Now, start up nicely, incorporate it into the paint, get it nice and thin. The method you're going to want to use is wipe it and see a little bit of translucency peeking through. Just a smidge. And that's the method you want to use. This way it can help your paints not only layer on properly, but help them also blend nicer. Some people won't even rinse their brush in this stage. They'll just let it naturally get thinned by the water on their wet palette, and will leave their brush full of paint, and when they transition between colors, it blends more naturally. I don't do that. I think that's a strange method, but to each their own. So, we're going to just go in and get a little bit of an unthinned corn red straight out of the pot. The reason we're doing this is so we don't have to, one, refer to our wet palette again, but also so that we can keep this easier. So, you're going to want to just start painting in the sword blade a red. And for some, this would actually be all you really would have to do on some models. If you are satisfied with this as a painter, you think this is good enough for your table, then that's good enough for you. If you would like something that's a little bit more of a gradient or a transition color going into the model, then, well, I'll explain that too. I'm not worried about covering the pommels or the cross guards of the sword. We can always clean that up later with some metallics or some different base tones. I went ahead and cleaned up the oil paints on the sword blade using some mineral spirits. That's the benefit of working with a pewter mini, is that pewter minis are very forgiving to various types of solvents. While this miniature does have a plastic variant, I still highly recommend the pewter version. Since pewter is very easy to work with, it's very forgiving. It's a pain to get seam lines off of, obviously, but it is a very forgiving material to work with when it comes to creating tones like this and cleaning up, because you can layer metallics and layer other solvents you generally couldn't use over plastic because you would run the risk of melting the plastic. Now, the disadvantage of using an oil paint over something like a contrast paint is that now we are running into the risk of having trouble cleaning up the model if we were to overspill. So, one effective way to fix that is trying to have a steady hand and prevent that from happening. But the sword blade's distanced just enough from the Mini to make this more effective. Now, we're going to begin our transitional highlights. I'm going to use a thinner brush, a little more of a tip, a little sharper of a tip to it, to help lay in these transitional highlights. Now, we're going to use a little bit of Fiston Red on our brush. I'm just layering it up onto our wet palette. And what you're going to want to do is start at the back of the hilt on this side. Back of the cross guard, or the center of the blade, and go to about the halfway point, working in small semicircles. Now you're going to want to do the same on this side, but starting from the tip of the blade, working your way to the same middle point of the sword, efficiently creating where you want your highest and lowest points to be. This will act as our mid-tone to help us really establish a tonality. Now on the back side we'll do the same thing, but of course in reverse. We'll start at the cross guard on the opposite side. We'll just fan it up to about the middle point. Here we'll go from about the middle point down to the tip of the blade. It's a very simple and effective method that creates a nice effect, glazing in colors to create an energy effect. And this can be done with any variety of paints, colors, finishes, everything. Very simple. And now we're going to let that have a chance to dry just a little bit. Just a small amount. And then we're going to take our Evil Sun's Scarlet. Same method as before. We're going to just start blending that into the area where it connects the most. So about right here. To create an effective glazing transition, I'll explain how you really want to go about doing this. I always go about creating some slightly different contrasting tones with each other. Really having to create a different effect, essentially. I try to not let any two of my weapons look the same when I'm using an energy effect with them. I try to keep them relatively subdued. Same on this side. I don't know how well you can see this on camera, obviously, but you can see that transition beginning to happen. It may not show up the greatest on camera due to the fact that, yet again, we're going to go back to transitioning these highlights properly. In the end, what you should wind up having is a seemingly glowing effect, or at least something mimicking a glowing effect. Doesn't matter what way you really go about applying the paint, just so long as the paint gets on the blade. It just gives that look of an energy effect. Now we're going to use a little bit of Fire Dragon Bright, and we're going to begin glazing it in to the starting points of each energy effect. So for this one, it's glazing it in here and feathering it down across the blade. We can clean up transitional areas with our other two colors, of course. It will look better once dry and once we clean everything up. And here you can already begin seeing that transition we want. I'm going to do the same on the back. It's very simple when you think about it. A thinned paint going into areas where you've established light and shadow work a little differently than traditional minis. Same thing here, just trying to brighten it up. And see, these reds and oranges really contrast nicely with the purples. They would contrast nicely with these purples. So why we feathered these back to this point is because now we're going to go in and clean this up and make it look like a cleaner transition between red and orange. So we're going to take a little bit of our mid-tone of red and just apply it to the very edge of this color. Fanning it down into the main parts of the sword. This is what we're doing, is we're creating smoother gradients. Take that little bit of scarlet, a little bit of Evil Sun's scarlet, and just directly blend it along with this, fanning it up into the little tiny starting points of this. And just same rule applies here. Same rule applies here. Now we're going to just feather this out with a drier brush. What we're going to do is take our brush and just start blending these in. Blending everything together nicely. So that way when it dries, it creates a nice effect. Again, it's hard to see on camera, given the fact that cameras don't usually pick up the smoothness of gradients. I'm going to try to we're going to do the same on the reverse side. This side being a little bit cleaner, but again, nothing's going to clean up perfectly. The reason nothing's going to clean up perfectly is because, well, given the scale we all work with, it's to be expected. I didn't want to sneeze on camera, that's why I made an abrupt cut here. So, just trying to get it back to this little center point. Here we're going to want to go from tip up to the middle point of the sword, about to there. Why you want to feather with a dry brush is because it'll help you create transitional highlights a little bit better. Help you smooth these rough areas out better. Help you to smooth out rougher transitions better. So, take our brush again and just brush some of this scarlet into here. Pull the reds together. Same rule applies here. Pull these reds across over into the orange, smoothing out all these transitions between red and orange. Get a little bit more of our scarlet to help blend this tone in better. To blend in these orangey tones, more to the reds around them. Creating a nice sort of orange glow effect. I'll try to get a little more reds going in some of these spots here. Get just a little more going in. A little bit more around the back here. Fanning up. A little bit more around the tip here. Fanning up. Okay. Again, we're going to use this larger brush to help create some smoother transitions. Just take a little bit of the orange, try to really brighten the orange up just a tad towards some of these areas. What we're trying to do is just create a bright look here. Kind of a fiery look. Same thing here. We can get in frames, you can see what I'm doing. And a little more of a defined look. This orange. Blending highlights like this and blending transitional colors like this is never inherently easy, and it's always going to be a little bit time consuming. That's why we're going to try our best to just feather everything together, like so. Using a wet brush, I like to fan everything together. Help all these transitions blend together and help really achieve some nicer tones. And it smooths everything out too. Helps everything look nicer. Helps everything kind of blend together. It's also a type of wet blending as well. And once this dries, you'll have a very nice fire effect to your sword. And of course, this looks better in person than it does on camera. It's very hard to see the transitions in color. I'll be sure to post some finished pictures on the website